Hi there. Welcome to Acrylic Painting Basics, 2 ways to begin a monochromatic painting. I'm your instructor, Adrienne Hodge, and this is part 2 of a 2-part class. So this is the conclusion of a class that we started 2 weeks ago. And Chanel can drop the link to part 1 in the chat for you if you're just joining us and you missed part 1. Still stick around for part 2 tonight, and then you can go back and get caught up with part 1 later. And yeah, so we'll definitely be covering some things or jumping in from where we started in part 1. I'm not going to be repeating anything. So oh, glad you're excited. I'm seeing some all caps excitement popping up in the chat. Okay, so I'm going to switch to my tabletop view and review supplies, and we'll just dive right in. Don't forget to tag your work with the hashtags Make It With Michaels or Michaels Classes, and follow me on Instagram at Adrienne Hodge Art. I'm also on Facebook, Adrienne Hodge Fine Art. And here's a few of my business cards. I'm always flashing on screen. My link tree is also available in the chat. And if you're joining on YouTube, you can find my link tree by searching my name, Adrienne Hodge, and Linktree, and that should come up. And I've got an online draw club and paint club that I'm doing lately, which you might want to check out. And that is on Saturday mornings, and it's just an independent couple of classes that I'm doing. If you really enjoy drawing and painting with me, make sure you check those out. This Saturday happens to be my birthday. We're going to be sketching and drawing a piece of cake and then painting a piece of cake, both in draw club and paint club. And we'll be using gouache for the paint club. So if you're interested in painting a nice big juicy piece of cake with me in gouache, make sure you check out that class, and it will definitely help that you attended tonight's class to inform that painting class in gouache. But yeah, that's just a totally separate thing that I've got going on. If you want to do more online classes with me, I'll be back for my next session of Michael's classes in 2 weeks. There won't be a class next Wednesday. And then we've got a bunch of fun classes coming up in March using colored pencils, and then also gouache for a mushroom painting. I thought I had that handy, but anyway, I'll just go ahead and move on and we'll get started here. So we're using acrylic paint tonight for this class, and this is what we may end up with. Your results may vary, but we'll have something that looks something like this. We ended last week's class with something that looks like that. So we've got these 2 different ways to start a monochromatic painting, and I'll get back to that in just a minute, but I'll just leave that up since it looks nice and pretty. We're using the golden acrylic paints purchased at Michael's or online through the Michael's website. Wherever you can find them, you can use any acrylic paint that you have on hand, and I've been definitely getting my uses out of that little set of primary colors there. And then I have a variety of brushes here. Most of them are Princeton brushes purchased at Michael's for acrylic painting. And you maybe don't have all of the same brushes that I do. And if you only had 3 brushes, I would want you to have at least 1 flat brush, although no, we're still going to use this one tonight. 1 nice flat brush, maybe 2, 1 nice round brush like that, and then 1 liner brush like this. So these 3 right here, if you had something like these 3, that would get you through the class pretty well. And on the supply list, I listed an entire set of paintbrushes, and then I also added this brush mainly because I wanted to make sure that you had 1 very little liner brush so that we can get these little details on our cherries here. Okay, but yeah, totally fine if you've got different brushes than me. And then I've got canvas paper. It's the Fredericks brand. canvas paper, which I don't have the actual, well, what did I do with it? It's across the room. You saw it there in the supply list. We're using canvas paper, and then you're gonna want a couple of water cups. I like to have two, one for my lighter values, one for my darker values, and then a couple of plastic palettes. I also like to have two because I like to be able to spread out on my palettes. And you are also going to want some blue tape to tape your canvas paper down if you are just joining us, or even if you did it last time, you maybe like me, you peeled your tape off. And so I'm gonna retape mine real quick in just a moment here to tape it down. And I think that's it. And oh, well, and then last week we wanted a sketchbook and some pencils because we did a little bit of sketching to talk about the contours of the cherry and the light and dark values. So if you missed that in part one, you definitely want to go back and watch that at some point later. It'll help and fill in a lot of blanks for tonight, but I'm not going to repeat that stuff. And then our reference photo was a PDF, and it has 3 different images of these cherries in there. We've got a more true light image, which I added this vignette to. So it's got a filter on it to have that vignette because I wanted us to paint a vignette around it. And then we're doing monochromatic, one color, but the full value scale of that one color. So I made it black and white so that we can sort of ignore the true colors a little bit here and just focus on the black and white using our black for the darkest, dark reddish blacks, and then for the medium shadows, and then working our way to white. So we've got this full value scale here from black to white on our cherries, and we're mainly looking at our black and white images to match those values from 0 to 10, 0 being the absolute white, 10 being the absolute black, and then our middle color would be the red straight out of the tube. So you definitely are going to want some white paint, some red paint, and some black paint. That is if you are doing a value scale of red here on the cherries, which feels like the obvious color, but here's a couple of examples I showed in part one. You could do some blue cherries or green cherries if you wanted to, or purple, or yellow, whatever you want to do. If you want to do a monochrome version of these paintings using a different value scale, you are welcome to do that. And your main color that you're using, so say you're using green, the main green without white would be in the center, and then you're adding white to that to get your tints of your color, and then you're adding black to it to get the shades of your color. And we're just looking at the black and white version of the photo to fill in those values from 0 to 10. Okay, so last time we did all that and we got to the point where we had begun the 2 ways of beginning a painting, and that is starting with a sketch. So we're painting with our paintbrush to create this sketch of the cherries. And then here we started with a tone. So a tone in music is one continuous thing. It continues on in one tone, right? So we have this ground or this tone of this medium pink here, although we used more of a tint of pink. And then in the toned version, you are just looking at the dark and light value shapes. So we spent some time sketching the dark and light value shapes, excuse me, that we're seeing in our black and white photo. And also we looked at the inverted light photo that I included here. So this photo shows the opposite values. All of the black is showing up white, all the white is showing up black, and vice versa for the other tints and shades there. So we looked at that and we drew just the light shapes, the absolute white, which is not a ton of information. And then we looked at our absolute tens and some of our midtones up here, and we had a little more information since the cherries themselves are pretty dark, right? The lightest parts are on the stem and those little highlights right there. So we started building that up using our paint on the tone version here, and on the sketched version, we just started filling in washes. And that was all we did. We used a little bit darker wash for the vignette, a little bit darker wash on the cherries, lighter washes for where we're seeing a lighter tone, and then we left it blank where we were seeing the highlights. So I'm going to retape my image down and start to mix up my value scale of red again over here. And then we'll just pick up where we left off. Hopefully that was a good full review for those of us who are just joining.
Adrian, quick question for you.
Yes.
For the reference photos, do you use an app to make the reverse black and white image?
Yes, I do, but you can also invert it in Photoshop, or you can actually do it on your iPhone. There's a way to, I don't know how to do this on Android, but if you tap the side button on the newer iPhone 3 times, it'll give you the option to invert, classic invert. And when I do that, it inverts the light on my entire phone. And then when I tap it 3 times again, I can go back. So that's one way to invert images. And there are tons of apps where you can do it as well. All right, I'm just taping my image down. I'm going kind of half on and half off at the edge of the canvas paper, and I'm kind of wrapping it around my little mat board or my cutting board that I have here. But if you had a piece of cardboard, that would be a great surface to tape your canvas paper down to. You could also get a piece of masonite board or a drawing board if you don't mind getting paint on it. And I recommend doing that, especially if you do not have a designated space for your art projects. If you're like a kitchen table painter right now and you're worried about the fact that someone's going to come along and move all your supplies away pretty soon, then having it taped down, having your project taped down to a piece of masonite board is really nice, because then you can just, take it off and set it on the side of the couch or behind something to store it. The other reason I'm taping this off, other than to have it just, somewhere I can keep it separated from my desk if I want, is I'll have a nice clean edge when I peel off the tape, although some of my water did sneak underneath there. And I think that might have happened to my last one. I'm starting to remember why I did what I did with this one last time. So I did have a pretty clean edge over here, but I guess I had that same sort of washy, leaky thing happen. So I just went around and painted some extra paint around there. But it's nice to have that clean edge if you don't have any leaks, to peel it off, and then it just, gives it a nice little frame. Okay, and then I just drew a line with my pencil to separate these 2 quadrants here. All right, next thing I want to do is get all of my values mixed up again. So I'm looking for at least 7 or 8 different values. So values are the light and dark of a color. So I've got my red, my black, and my white. And if you're just jumping in with us here, like I said, you can use, I'd love to see some examples at the end of the class of folks using other colors, even though I do think the red is an obvious choice. it would be fun to see a variety of monochromatic paintings here, and also doing this in a different color than me would give you a little bit more autonomy over the work and would create a little, I don't know how much more challenging it would be. If you chose yellow, that would, you might want brown instead of black as your darkest color, because the black paint will turn yellow more of like a greenish hue. Also, I should mention for those of you just joining us in this series, we did have a class a while back on color theory basics in acrylic paint, and Chanel can drop that class into the chat. It was a two-part class where we created something like this, a page of notes running through value scales and mixing primary colors to get secondary colors, and then mixing neutral tones and mixing black instead of using black out of the tube. And then we also made pastel colors. So that's very helpful if you'd like to refer back to that, and just searching color theory basics and maybe Michael's and my name on YouTube, and you should be able to find it. Okay. You can use a palette knife to mix up your values here. I like to just use a smaller paintbrush, mostly because we're mixing a pretty small amount of paint here, and I feel like palette knives are better for mixing up large amounts of paint. And then also, sometimes a palette knife doesn't really stir it up on a small scale as much as you'd like it to. So I'm always going to start with the lighter color, and then slowly add the darker color. And I'm going to take the lighter color to a separate part of my palette. So I'm going to take some white, might even take some white to a few different places since we want a few different tints here. And then I'm cleaning my brush before I touch the red paint so that I can get all of the white off of my brush and I'm not contaminating my red pile with white, although that's one of those do as I say, not as I do sort of things, because you'll see that I'll quickly start to make a mess of my colors and integrate all my original piles. But in a perfect world, it's nice to keep them separated so, you know, you have some pure red that doesn't have white or black in it. And then even before I introduce it to the white, I keep it a little separated as well, just so I can control how much I'm adding. Because the darker color is always going to overtake the lighter color. And then I recommend that even if you already have, since we're breaking this up into two parts, and it was 2 weeks ago when we mixed up these values, I recommend still painting another little swatch over here. So it doesn't matter if your values are in a certain order, but it's nice to paint a swatch because you can just see how it looks painted on the canvas. It's always going to look a little different on the canvas versus how it looks on your palette. All right, we're looking for one that's just like a baby's breath of pink here. And we're probably going to have to mix these up a few times, but it's good to just do it once and just get a feel for it. And then you very likely are going to have to mix more. Like I'm definitely going to need more than that small pile of all of these so far. So I've got one baby's breath of pink, one little bit darker pink, and then just a pink that's got a lot more red than. I'm just going to go ahead and paint over that one. Oh, I matched that pretty well. And then we want an absolute white swatch as well. Although you probably don't need to paint that again unless you're just joining us, but it's good to just see the difference between the super pale pink and the white on the canvas. And then we'll do just a little swatch of red with nothing added to it. And I'm cleaning my brush between all of these. My red's ending up over there on the side because I had one floating color from last time too. So don't worry about your value scale looking perfect over there. All right, and then to make our shades of red, we're going to separate our red before we add black to it as well. And this is where I start to break my own rule. And we're just taking a touch of the black. You might have to like wipe some of it off in some place on your palette if you get too much right off the bat. Because we want one with just a little bit of black added to it. More red than black. The black will absorb that red pretty quickly. And then we want a dark red. So more black than red, but still red showing through. And that's going to be very easy to make because, like I said, the red's going to get overpowered very quickly by the black. You don't have to add too much more black for that to happen. If you add too much black, then it's going to just look black and you're not going to see the red in there because the black can definitely absorb a lot of things, a lot of red, and just not see it. Okay, and then we'll paint just black paint next to that so we can see the difference between our dark red and then our black by itself. I've got these long paint brushes and then my camera is right over my canvas. It's such a weird little acrobatic dance with my long paintbrush to keep it from smacking the camera. So if you see me swinging my paintbrush around horizontally a lot, that's why I'm doing it. All right, and then you want to paint your paper towel until you see no pigment coming out. That's how you know your paintbrush is clean. So if you're trying to go back to your white at any point and you've got a bunch of paint in your paintbrush, just paint the bottom of your cup until you get all the paint off of there, dab it on a paper towel. It should be clear. That seems like one of those really obvious things, but I teach a lot of in-person classes and be amazed how many people are like, I can't figure out why all my all my colors are turning green. And I'm like, maybe you still have green in your paintbrush. Let's clean it a little. Okay. So we've got our values mixed up. We're going to have to mix up more of these. Let's start with our, which one do you want to start with? Let's go with the washes. So last time we filled in all of these washes and we want to continue building on this start last week with more washes that match the values here. And like I said, results may vary at the end of the class. If you go rogue and you start going with super thick paint, you may get pretty far. You may go a lot faster than me. I'm not going to go super thick just yet. I'm going to keep it kind of washy. And in my in-person classes, when I'm teaching oil and acrylic, I sometimes have people who just refuse to stay thin and washy at the beginning of the painting process, and they feel like they're breaking my rules or something. You're not. I mean, you do whatever you want. I'm not the boss of you. If you want to go in with super thick paint right away after these initial washes, then you totally can. But the thing is, you can't go back. So with acrylic paint, it's plastic, it's polymer based. If you go super thick, you're gonna have to stay that thick or thicker as you continue to build your layers, because if you try to go back over it with a thin wash at some point, it's going to just kind of pool and it's not going to have the effect that that you might want it to. So, but if you start out with washes and build on washes, you can, you know, slowly increase the thickness that you're adding. And I just feel like it gives you more control that way. And so that's why I like to do it, because I like to be in control. Oh my goodness, I just smeared some red paint on my iPad there. Okay, so looking at the black and white photo, it gets pretty dark here. And last time we were in a bit of a hurry there at the end of the class, we didn't really match, or I didn't match the value that I was seeing. So I'm gonna go with this darker red, and I'm gonna do another wash. So I'm just taking my paintbrush and just dripping water on top of that color, that value, to get it to be nice and thin and washy. And the more water I add, the washier it's going to be. And it really looks like cherry juice. So that's fun. All right, so it gets pretty dark on our cherries everywhere except for the highlights. So I'm going to go ahead and fill in, even where it gets darker than this, I'm going to go ahead and fill in most of it with this darker wash. So very much according to that sketch that we did where we looked at like the crescent moon shape that's hugging the cherries where the darkest value is. And I can always go thicker, I can always go darker, but once you go that dark and thick, it's hard to take it back. So that's why I like to do it this way. And I do have a little bit of a puddle collecting there. I'm just gonna leave it alone, although I could take it and drop it in some other places where it gets nice and dark, like in the center here. Or I could also spread it around into the shadows. Those shadows get pretty dark as well. Yeah, there's nothing wrong with going in with super thick paint after these initial washes, but it definitely, it just gives you more opportunities to get things the way that you want them. And then now I'm going to go up here to this vignette situation and start filling that in with this darker cherry juice red. And I'm just quickly establishing that feeling of like a curtain coming in all of the corners. So by doing this, we can start to see the painting come to life in layers. And each layer really informs the next one, and the stakes are a lot lower because we're going thin. So we just have more control. And I can kind of blend this out really easy, get a feeling for this little scrubby motion that you can use to blend it out. So see how I'm already creating that vignette, but like I said, with the stakes being low. And I almost don't even have to like add the lighter pink color. I can just keep stretching out what I have in this darker wash and pulling it around so that it fades. And I can, yeah, really start to achieve that vignette effect with low stakes. If you went super thick right away, then you know what I mean by my stakes being low, because you're probably feeling that your stakes are kind of high. If you went super thick, you feel like you gotta get it right on that first pass. And a lot, you might hear painters using that word, like the pass. I'm going to make another pass, or the last pass, or first pass over it. That's what they mean, is we're working in layers. So we're making a pass over the whole thing, and then we'll go back and make another pass. And each time we're increasing our thickness. Okay, so let's make a lighter wash of the lighter pink here. I'm going to go with this middle one. So just going to drip in some water. And I might go a little thicker with this one. I wanted the dark wash to be thinner because those dark values are high stakes. So I want the stakes to be as low as possible in the initial passes with those darker colors. So I went a little thicker with the lighter pink here. And I'm just bouncing around in the background here. And again, if this is too dark, I can always go back and with another layer of the lighter pink. You can always add more paint on top of paint. Paint is not permanent. And especially when you're trying to lighten something, unless you made it absolute black, with thick paint, you should be able to cover it up with some titanium white, because titanium white is the most opaque color that you're going to have. So I'm going in between my cherry stems and around my cherries, and I'm trying to get a little more precise around those edges. But I definitely want the bottom of these two pieces of paper. So I'll just identify like the top background where the seam is. This was a piece of paper and this was a piece of paper. So the top piece of paper appears a little darker. So we might go a little darker on top and a little lighter on the bottom here. So let me go ahead and make more of a wash of this pale pink. And this is really where the pale pink shows up the most, other than the highlights. This is a pretty dark little painting, but we want this pale pink for the bottom piece of paper in the background. So below that horizon line, and then a little bit up into the top as well. So go ahead, and that last layer is still a little wet for this to cover it up, but go ahead and establish. And since I know that this is the color that it's going to be, and it's not really a high risk, I could maybe go ahead and go a little thicker right here. I'm going to go ahead and make a little pile of this pale pink and go a little thicker with this layer. So I might actually pull some of that out with my paper towel so that I can get it to not be too wet right there. That's another thing, your paper towel is your best friend. It's one thing in my in-person class that just ended this week. I realized at the end of the class I hadn't imparted one very kind of basic hack, which is use your paper towel. If it got too wet, pull it out with a paper towel. Like, that's one of those things that I think you just do with practice, but maybe if you're afraid to do that for some reason, there were some people who didn't even consider that as an option. So that's one way to do it. get it to be a little more dry again, or you can wait for it to dry, but it just makes sense to pull it out with a paper towel. And now I'm just going in with thicker paint. So in this low stakes area where I know it's just going to end up this value, I might as well go ahead and fill this in. Also, I'm calling it low risk, but I want to go ahead and get the background filled in as soon as possible because it can feel high risk trying to fill in a background later when you get too far. So you definitely want to establish some things here. The vignette is really the part where I want us to build up to it. I'm using pretty thick paint here to go ahead and establish that lighter pink background behind the cherries. And then that'll probably be it for this layer, and we'll bounce over to the toned one. And it's nice to do two paintings like this at once, because one thing that a lot of people don't factor into the painting process is letting layers dry. With acrylic paint, the layers dry really quickly, but it's still important to sometimes, not always, but it is often important to let things kind of set in before you keep going, unless you're trying to blend. If you're trying to blend areas, then you want to work quickly. And that's why in that vignette, it's better to build up slowly with washes so that when we get ready to blend it, we're done with everything else and we can leave it alone. If you try to get it right the first time and then fill in the rest of the background and keep having to rework that vignette over and over again, it will very quickly start to become frustrating. And only those of you who have jumped ahead and are already doing that know what I mean. I feel like there's got to be at least one person who jumped ahead and is already struggling with that vignette. If that's you, tell us in the chat. That vignette's probably the trickiest part of this painting. Okay, so that layer is good for me. I got my light pink in there. So now I'll go ahead and go back in with my darker pink up there at the top. So we're really working our way from the background forward, and that is a great rule of thumb, again, to have control over the situation, to not have to paint in those little spaces in between later. You know, if we painted the cherries in full detail and then tried to fill in this background behind them, we'd be running into a lot of issues with that. And if you've ever painted a tree first and then tried to paint a sky in between the you know, spaces in between leaves, then you know what I'm talking about. Okay, so I need more of that darker pink. I'm gonna mix some more of that up real quick. And this little study really will happen fairly quickly. I feel like most of this part 2 class here is just mixing up our values again and getting our values to match. And also that vignette. The cherries themselves are going to be pretty straightforward when we get to them. So we're going to nail this vignette over here. Then we're going to work on it on the other one. And then we're going to bounce back and forth between the two of them. And the cherries are going to be the last thing we paint. So if you're one of those people that loves to jump to the details and you just got to put those highlights on the cherries as soon as possible, this is a good exercise in patience for you. Okay, so I'm going with thicker paint now up here. And yeah, I don't have to worry about my darker vignette color matching just yet because that wet wash was just a thin layer. And now I'm going a little bit thicker, so we're building up to the darkest part of that vignette now. Are y'all excited about the vignette? Am I making it sound scary because I'm acting like it's tricky and building up to it? Hopefully not. I'm just working my way up to it too because I don't want to. I struggled with it last time, I'll be honest. Sometimes I try to put myself in y'all's shoes when I'm doing these, and sometimes I just end up in the shoes of, oh, this is a tricky thing to paint. Okay, so already I'm a little dark right here, and I want to have that lighter pink radiate out from the center. I'm mixing up another little pile of the lighter paint. This is why the vignette is tricky, is you get one layer how you want it, but then you need to get the other layer in there and you want them to blend. So we're coming right up next to that other layer of color, and we're kind of painting into it a little bit and then stopping. So it's almost like a little rainbow of values that are happening here, and we're keeping them fairly separated. We're really only touching the two of them together where they meet and then letting them be separated. And starting from the outside and working your way in is a good way to start, but at a certain point you're going to have to go in the center and then work your way back out. So with my lighter pink, so I'm kind of filling in that area just like a little rainbow stripe might be. And then when I get to the edge of where the colors touch, or the values touch, kind of touching both of them with my paintbrush, but then going back into the center. So I'm just trying not to like pull all of the darker color into the center or push all of the lighter color out. We want them to kind of breathe in their own areas. And the faster you work, the easier it is to blend because the acrylic paint dries so fast. And I think embracing a visible brush stroke right here is the way to go. It's so funny how in all of my, I feel like I'm referencing my in-person classes a lot lately, but I've just had a lot of people lately really annoyed with visible brush strokes. They're like, how do I get rid of those visible brush strokes? And I'm like, I don't know. You don't sometimes, like, just what's wrong with them? Like, look at Van Gogh. Could you imagine if Van Gogh was like, how do I get rid of these visible brush strokes? Or Cezanne, like, visible brush strokes are not the worst thing ever, right? If you want it to be just really softly blended, you can try taking one of your rounder brushes that are not wet, a dry brush, and you can do like once it gets to this point where it's kind of sticky and tacky here, we can go around in little circles and we can really try to soften that edge where those different tones are meeting. Or I can take a little bit of my lighter color, like right here, and kind of scrub it into the darker layer. And that's how I can really soften and blend. But overall, I think having some visible brush strokes is not the worst thing. So I say embrace visible brush strokes. All right, let's do this darker color. Let's get this vignette rolling for real now. Okay, so I want my red, mostly red, and just a little bit of black. We'll get it. Actually, I need more red than that. Let's just go ahead and make a big pile of this. And then just a little bit of black. I'm just gonna try to control how dark I make it by not adding the black all at once. And actually, yeah, let's go with this darker shade of red that's not quite our darkest red on our shade scale. That way we can really have a nice fade. So we'll do the absolute darkest red at the very corners, but right here we'll just come in like at the edge of our curtains and start to put in I might go ahead and go all the way into the little triangle corner there. I can start to see the vignette come to life, even though we're going to end up going even darker in those corners. All right, so it feels very kind of pasted on right now. It doesn't feel like a blended vignette here. So this is where we gotta do the thing we were just doing with our pinks, where we kind of scrub out. So I'm just going around right at the edge and just doing this little scrubby motion. And resist the urge to like keep going and going with it, because then, you know, your dark red could very quickly start to close in on the center of the cherries. And this is where we want to work really quickly so that we can blend quickly before it dries. Because some of this maybe is already drying really fast, especially if you didn't have any water on your brush to keep it moving around. It might be already super dry. All right. So another trick we can do right here, since this is where I was saying a wash on top of thick paint maybe might not have the desired effect, but right here, if I just go in with a wet brush, I can really, might be able to fade some of this out in a way that I'm happy with. But it's still feeling like a pretty steep jump from dark to light there in some places. So this is where I want to go back in with one of my pinks and blend into the darker layer. And maybe I want to even take my paper towel and let my paper towel help me blend and fade it out a little bit. All right, but I think I'm just going to go back in with my darker pink now. And maybe while you're at it, you might go ahead and start to do the vignette on the other side if you were, you know, feeling like, hey, I could just go ahead and do the other one too. I'm going to stick to just one at a time, and I might not finish both of them, but I've at least shown you how to do the vignette on one side, being aware of the time. Okay, I need this dark pink again. This almost red pink. I'm going back in with the almost red pink, and I'm just going right up to the edge of the darker red and trying to blend into it a little bit. And yeah, you definitely end up with kind of a stripe at a certain point here, but eventually we're going to get this all blended. You just have to work at it. once had an art advisor who was my middle person between a very high-end client who purchased a very expensive commission for me a few years ago. Call me the master blender. And I was like, oh, I like that. I definitely have mastered how to blend. That ethereal thing that I do in a lot of my personal work doesn't just happen, people. All right, now I've got my lighter pink again, and I'm trying to just get rid of that stripe. I don't need to make all my brush strokes go away, but I do want it to feel soft. It's feeling pretty soft right there, but down here I've got a stripe. So I'm just going to the edge. I'm letting it kind of sit there a minute, letting it get kind of tacky, like sticky tacky, not like, oh girl, where'd you get those shoes tacky? Sticky. And then I'm doing that little scrubby motion. I would never say that to somebody about their shoes, by the way. I was just trying to think of how do I describe the other kind of tacky. Okay, this is a moment where I like to use brushes like this. I'm like, I might have to cheat a little bit. If you have an old brush that you don't care about, that's all kind of messed up, I never throw those away. And you can use those to do this little dry brush thing. And look at how that's blending. That's what you really want right here is a ruined brush. That's my trick to getting my ethereal cloudiness to happen is makeup brushes work really well, eyeshadow brushes, if you don't mind ruining one of those, or a brush that you maybe thought was trash, don't throw it away, use it to blend. All right, that's feeling pretty soft. It's still a little stripy from dark to light, but we're about to add the dark, and then we got to blend all over again. Blending never ends when you're trying to make a vignette happen, but it's so satisfying. Who doesn't love a vignette? Okay, let's get our dark red on there. I mean, the like black red. I'm just gonna add some black to my dark red from before. I want it to be my darkest red value. And even more than that. This is the one that was right below my absolute black. Just being careful not to, I guess at this point, I do just need more black. Okay, there we go. And we'll paint this in our very corners, kind of like little photo corners here, and then we'll blend this into the dark red layer, and that should do it. That should be enough contrast. To make it feel vignette-y. And we might be able to get away with just doing it like this. But if you need to use that trick I showed you with a brush you don't care about, and any brush can become a brush you don't care about. You just have to stop caring about it and turn it into a, decide that that's going to be your blender brush. Cracking myself up over here. But Adrian, how do I find a brush I don't care about? It could be that one right there in your hand. Okay, I'm gonna use my little dry brush thing again. It's very hard to get to a point of like absolute satisfaction with this vignette. I feel like I could do a whole nother layer on the whole thing, but that's good enough. Good enough. Oh no, see, that's what happens when it was super thick and then that brush was not dry. It was still a little wet. I have a lot of brushes that I designate for this because once you used one, then it's not a dry brush anymore. So I end up needing a lot of brushes I don't care about. Oh, that got really dark right there. I'm not going to worry about it. I'm just going to blend out these other areas. I showed y'all how to do it. You know the move. I'm not going to worry about perfection. Otherwise, we'll be here all night. Okay, so it's the same thing for the other vignette. Once we, oh, do I do it? I was about to put a little light pink up here and blend it out, try to fix that moment. I'm like, it's okay if it's not perfect. And then I immediately go to trying to fix it. Nope, I'm leaving it alone. Okay. So you keep doing that and eventually you'll get to where you're satisfied. But even looking at these, I can see there are some moments where I probably just had to like stop myself from overworking the vignette. So I think once it dries and we get the cherries in there, the imperfect moments are not going to jump out at you so much. I say to myself as much as to you. Okay, so we've got our background filled in on this one and we're ready to start painting our cherries, but we've been really neglecting the tone cherries over here. So let's see, we have exactly 30 minutes. I'm gonna go ahead and at least fill in part of my vignette background over here. I'm not gonna, I don't wanna just ignore it completely, but I'm not gonna go as hard as I did with that one. So let's start from our center here and work our way out just so that we can establish, even though that's kind of going backwards from what I said. As far as working your way from the background forward, mostly I just want to get this area out of the way so that we can paint the cherries and have the background established. So I've got that lighter pink and it's pretty thick. I'm just going to go ahead and fill in. Oh, I didn't paint this cherry over here yet though. Okay, wait a second. Wait a second. Well, I've already got it on my brush. I'm just going to go ahead and fill it in over here. Sorry, y'all. I'm getting ahead of myself a little bit. Forgot about that whole other cherry. I got so caught up with the vignette over there on the other one. All right, we'll worry about this in just a moment. Let's start with our smaller brush, your smaller round brush. And we'll go just like we did in the last class over here to our cherries and start to just look at those dark and light value shapes and start to bounce back and forth and build up the cherries this way. And this is why a lot of people prefer the tone painting, is because it does allow you to go straight for the details. I was just so caught up with the vignette. I was like, maybe let's quickly get the vignette going over here, but we got to still paint our cherries on this one. Okay, so starting with whichever one you want, the light or the dark. People always ask me, which one would I start with? And my answer is usually pretty frustrating. It's because you want me to say, start with the light or start with the dark. I'd start with both sometimes. It depends. I don't always start with the darks and I don't always start with the lights. And also at a certain point in any painting practice, it doesn't matter what somebody else would do. You got to find your own way of carving your path. So I'm just getting some of these light pinks mixed up again here so I have them at the ready because mine dried up. So I got that pale pink, I got that darker pink, and then I think I have enough of my dark red. That's what I'm going to need the most of. All right, so they're pretty dark. The cherries are pretty dark, but there's this area where it's definitely more of a lighter pink around the highlights. So I had already put my highlights in there a little bit, so I'm kind of just painting around the highlights with the light pink. And I'm trying to get that roundedness to happen here. Might go ahead and go a little darker with my pink. This is where those contours come in, is to think about the curved surface that you're painting and try to curve your brush strokes around. And it kind of disappears into the tone, this darker pink, because it's the same color as the tone, but I've gone pretty thick with my paint here. And that's another reason people who like to go thick right off the bat tend to like the tone painting a little better. So this is maybe where you're starting to realize what your preferences are. And your preferences really only can become obvious to you the more you practice and the more you paint yourself. All right, and then the darker red. Make sure I have a nice pile of my darker red here. Or actually, there's only a few moments where we need this lighter shade of red. And that would be close to the center here where it starts to curve into the center of the cherry. And that's actually looking pretty dark. So maybe I want to go back over this with more of like my medium red hue. And you can think about that vignette right here too, how you're blending these out. You're kind of painting the different values right next to each other. And then at the edge where they touch, you're getting them to soften a little bit at that edge. And I wouldn't worry about visible brush strokes here. So yeah, it might be kind of hard to see, but I already have a lot of light, thick, light pink on there. It's just the same color as the tone, so it's kind of disappearing into the tone. So as I'm coming in with my darker red, I'm being very careful not to overtake the dark pink or muddy it too much right there. So I just realized this cherry is a little bit higher up in the picture plane. The one on the right's a little higher than the one on the left, but I painted them kind of right next to each other here. And if you did the same thing, I would not worry too much about that. We'll just embrace our little differences that may be showing up in our unique paintings, because we're not robots. We're not all going to have identical cherries. They might have a little bit different proportions. They might be in a little bit different angles. I'm not too worried about it. But it definitely did have some character being at a slightly different angle there. I'm a little bummed that I forgot about that, but I'm not gonna fix it at this point. I'm looking for that little shaped down here on the bottom, that little double, almost like a upside down heart shape. And then we kind of have a heart shape up here on the top too. And then we want this little curve right here, that little vortex, like the top of an apple. You might have to put that in a few times. But yeah, the toned method, it really comes to life very quickly. And that's why a lot of people who've never painted with a tone first love it, because there's a certain amount of realism that can be achieved that is very satisfying. There's something about that tone that just makes these other values pop underneath it. Okay, now I'm going to water down my darker red here and just put my shadows in a little bit because I never put my shadows in. I'm going to kind of combine my methods here a little bit by having more of like a painted sketch to get those shadows in, and however you want to do it is, if it's a little different than me, is fine. But since this tone is dry underneath, I can kind of go in with more of a wash, or I can go ahead and go in pretty thick as well, but the shadows are a little transparent, so I might just want them to be washy so that they feel like the shadows. And then you guessed it, whenever you're ready, we're going to do the same thing over here to the other painting. So the one with the washes, we're eventually going to get to the point where we paint thicker paint. On the toned method, you kind of jump right to that juiciness. And on the underpainted method, you build up to it. So I'll go ahead and come over here with my dark red and do the same thing. And each one is probably just going to look a little different. Because again, we're not robots. And we're using a different painting method. So it's going to just, I don't know, like when I compare these other ones, these other examples here, like my pears, I can tell just by looking that this is probably the one that I started with the tone. And this is the one that I painted. So I've got a little more visible brush strokes here on the one that I started with an underpainting sketch. I've got a little more variation in my values because I built up to them. And this one has more of like a graphic effect to it because I went in, you know, thicker right off the bat like we did over here. So this one maybe is just going to feel a little more painterly, possibly. I mean, your results will vary, right? But we could also take our time and build up more with washes over here, right? We could have a little more control by slowly introducing thicker and thicker paint. And that really is a way that I prefer to, like, I think with the cherries, since they go so fast, I think having more control and building up with the washes, like I can get that softness and that contour to happen with the wash. See how I'm like getting that to be nice and rounded, although I made that feel pretty rounded too. I don't know, I really don't have a favorite. They both have their benefits. So I realize nobody asked me which one did I like better, but I'm still trying to choose over here. And yeah, you can start with the dark and then work your way towards the light, or you can start with the light and work your way towards the dark, or kind of go back and forth between the two of them. It's really up to you. I'm filling in the shadow here now that I've already gotten so far with this one. That was kind of one of the last puzzle pieces, was the shadow. And I'll be honest, it's really hard to think about this like super formulaic way to paint after a certain point. I used to teach at those paint and sip establishments. I worked at a couple of different ones. And 3 different locations total. Or no, I guess it was just 2. Anyway, my point is I struggled teaching at places like that because I always wanted to teach people how to actually paint. I had a hard time just showing them how to do it. Just like, here's how to do it just for this particular thing, because I feel like there's not just one way to approach something. There's like maybe the way I'm approaching it right this moment, but trying to follow along and paint something identically to somebody is really hard. And it's rare that anybody in the audience at those places are going to do that. They're all going to look a little different. And I said that line about how we're not robots all the time while teaching at those places. And if you've been there, you've probably heard people, the person leading the class say the same thing. So anyway, all right. So I've got my darks established over there. I'm gonna go back and put my lights in and then bounce back over to this other one. I'm just going back and forth and doing essentially the same thing now on these layers, although with this one, I can keep it a little washy and control what I'm doing a little bit more. If you want, you can do that. Are there any questions jumping out at this point?
I think everybody's been hard at work because there hasn't been very many questions at all.
Okay, wow. There is one value we haven't really added yet, and that's just the red by itself. But I feel like that is kind of a nice thing to do towards the end of where you're like kind of satisfied with it, because it is a really dark cherry. It's really dark. And that red can almost be like a way to create some contrast between all that dark and your lighter values. And also I'm kind of forcing the red in there where I don't really see it. Like looking at the true color, I don't know that I actually see red except for in a couple of places right there next to the highlights. And it kind of has some darker red coming into it, like on top of it. So maybe you just kind of bounce around and use it as like an accent color in some places. And it can also be useful to help blend out if you're feeling like you've got a stripe from dark to light. Since the red is a little transparent, the paint itself is a little transparent, it can be good. It could also be good to use on the vignette if you're feeling like your vignette needs, you know, kind of a connector value. That could be the one for you. All right. And yeah, I'm realizing the more we close in on the hour here that I am probably not going to get both of these finished to the point that the example for the class was, but I'm definitely giving you all the tools to be able to get it more to a finished state on your own. And I'll talk about these stems in just a moment. as well. Let me at least try to blend out on these cherries a little more before I move on to the stems. So yeah, I'm really just kind of bouncing around between both of them right now and building up while I have this each value on my paintbrush, like rather than cleaning my brush and going between each value back and forth. I'm like, all right, I've got the darker pink. Let me put the darker pink everywhere. I might need it on all four of them. But the cherries themselves, the more I get in here with it, I realize like starting with that vignette was very helpful because we did it on a larger scale and now we're blending same sort of vignette situation, but just on the cherries on a smaller scale. So that is probably very helpful for you that you already did it with the vignette, so you know you can do it again. And then we haven't put our white on here yet, but that's going to really give it a nice little pop when we get that absolute white highlight in there. And then we can also go back in with our absolute black and do the same thing and give it this high contrast. So if you're kind of getting like a nice rounded spherical thing to happen with these blended values, that's good because the last little accent is going to really drive it home, and that's going to be the absolute white and the absolute black. And we can also put some of these little dents in here as well with the black and having those little imperfections on the cherries will really make them feel more cherry-like. Okay, I feel like that's pretty good. I'm gonna go back in with my little liner brush and just some black now and try to add those little accents that are gonna really, so like at the center of my little vortex up here at the top. I'm gonna do that. And maybe I do that along that crescent line as well. And I can blend that in just a moment if it feels a little stark. Maybe I'll go ahead and blend it right now. Okay. And maybe I'm not going to have time to do that to all of them, but if you missed it, you got the recording of the class to go back to later, where I just added the accents to that one. Let me get a couple little dents in here on this one too, like it's like a little dent right there. Maybe I'll just add some dents because those really help to make it feel more realistic. Okay. And then while I have the black on my brush, or this dark red and black, go ahead and address these stems a little more. So with the other one, we kind of established those darks right away on the stem, but here I want to put in that little broken line of black that I'm seeing, and it's just like the coloring of the stem itself. And you might need to blend these out with the lighter shades and tints here. And I wouldn't worry about matching the photo exactly here. We're just trying to give the idea of what's going on the stems. Maybe you do a couple of little dots first and then build up more of a line. You can always go back in with your white. So I'm going to do that. And maybe look at the black and white photo instead of the true color photo for this. Maybe I might go back in with my lighter pink, although that's really matching the color of the tone, I mean the background. All right, but you get the idea. We're just blending out those moments, but not being too particular about it. Otherwise, we'll lose the lovely, shape that we have already. So I wouldn't worry about perfection on those stems. Just get a few highlights and a few lowlights. And then for the highlights on the cherries themselves, same thing. We're just doing nice little highlight to make it pop. And you'll do the same thing on all of them. Try not to get too attached to exactly how the cherries look, and just look at your painting and try to make your painting feel satisfactory, like a cherry. All right, I think I covered every aspect of the process for both here. So it's the same thing for the vignette on both. We just didn't have the time for me to paint two vignettes. And you just keep building up the light and dark, and it was just two different ways of getting us started. But eventually you're painting, right? Eventually you're just riding the bike and you're doing the same sort of thing to both sides. It was just two different ways to get started. I'd love to see some of y'all's examples. We got 5 minutes left here. If you want to hold up your examples, I could also answer questions if anybody has any. So Chanel can spotlight you. All right, this is Barbara's. Lovely, Barbara. Oh, look at how realistic those cherries are looking. Those are really popping. Yeah, for the vignette, just keep doing the same thing. You've got a nice blend to your lighter pinks. So I just want to do that same thing with the darker red. And you'll get that vignette pulled together. All right, this is Carol. Oh yeah, look how different these are all looking. Wow, I'm loving it, Carol. Those are really juicy. Those are so fun. All right, this is Swanche. I feel like I've had you hold up your work before and I'm trying to pronounce your name. I'm probably wish you could correct me. But we don't have audio for y'all. Beautiful. Look at those vignettes. They've got such a nice circular feeling to them on the left. I like how it kind of goes off the page, and the cherries feel like they're floating a little bit. You could anchor them down, but they feel like I could just pluck them right off of those backgrounds. They're looking so realistic. You could anchor them down a little bit more with your shadows, or maybe that line in the separation of the background would anchor them a little more as well. All right, we've got Pikachu and Choco Cat Oh, look at that. Those are lovely. I love how pink you kept everything. That vignette is so soft and pink. That's another option. If you got your light pinks all blended, you don't even really need the darker vignette. What am I doing? I made it so much more complicated than it needed to be. That's so lovely. I love the lighter pink vignette. That's nice. Oh yeah, and your toned one is really, really nice and graphic. Beautiful work. Oh my goodness, look at that one, Emmanuel. That is a blended vignette. That's how it's done. Look at that. And your toned cherries are coming alive over there. I'm really impressed. That is gorgeous. You're doing it. Holy moly, look at those realistic cherries. That's my buddy Juan, of course. Wow, look at those ones on the left one. Well, really both of them. Oh, you just captured the gesture and the weight of them leaning against each other. And that glisten, they just feel like they're still wet from being rinsed off or something. Those are beautiful. And the stems are so nice and gestural. Those are just gorgeous. That is satisfying. And Stephanie, those are really nice too. Oh, I love how black you made them. They really, yeah, that darkness of them, but you've got the contours coming across so strong. I really feel the volume and the weight of those as well. Oh, and your vignette, look how soft. Ooh, they're like it's glowing over there on the right. That is really great. Yeah, you kind of did like a swishy thing with your paintbrush to really get that circular thing going, I bet. That's nice. Y'all are inspiring me. This is demo. Ooh, look at the ones on the right. Those have a really nice weight and volume to them as well. And I really feel the lean. Those are gorgeous. The students have exceeded the teacher in some cases here. I am just blown away. All right, and these are Beverly's. Those are really beautiful as well. And that vignette is so nice and soft. I like how you just started the vignette over there on the right. It's got a really nice atmosphere starting. Keep that same energy going as you continue blending that vignette out. That's really nice. There's always the option to not do a vignette, by the way, y'all. You could always just leave it like a nice texture back there. But I feel like we did it on one, then you kind of want it on the other side too, just to balance it out. All right, this was so fun. The next class is in 2 weeks, and it is a mountain forest floor scene using polychromos colored pencils, and I'm really excited about it. You can see I don't have it right here to hold up next to me, but you can sign up for it on the Michaels website, and it's a 2-part class, and I'm really looking forward to that one. So hopefully I'll see you all next time for that exploration, and make sure you sign up for my draw club or paint club online on Zoom this Saturday if you'd like to join me and continue drawing and painting with me. Thank you all, and thank you, Chanel. Y'all have a great rest of your evening.